When people speak of Dunkirk, they speak of survival, of courage under fire. They speak of the miracle, the evacuation of over 300,000 men from the beaches of northern France in 1940. But what most don't know is that some soldiers were never rescued, and some who were never truly returned. This is the story of the Ghost Soldiers of Dunkirk, a tale buried beneath the official history, a tale whispered by the survivors and denied by the generals. Late May 1940, the British Expeditionary Force was trapped. The German army, fast, relentless, had cut through France like a blade through paper. Private Thomas Reed, a radio operator, 23 years old, from Manchester, hadn't slept in 3 days. His hands trembled as he twisted the dial on his radio, trying to catch orders through the static. "All units, fall back to the coast. Dunkirk, Dunkirk." The word repeated again and again, a single name echoing across broken radios, a desperate promise of salvation. Thomas and his unit, the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, began their march toward the sea. But as they moved through the ruins of villages, they noticed something strange. No birds, no civilians, and no sound except the wind and the distant rhythmic thunder of artillery. They passed burnt-out trucks, twisted bicycles, and the corpses of soldiers, both British and German, lying side by side. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was watching them. By the 3rd night, the battalion took shelter in an abandoned church outside Dunkirk. The stained glass was shattered, and the pews were scorched black by fire. The men lit small candles and tried to rest on the cold stone floor. Thomas sat near the altar, his radio beside him. He kept hearing static, but beneath it, something like a whisper. At first he thought it was interference, but then the voice became clearer. "Hold the line, hold the line." It wasn't coming from any frequency he knew. The signal was faint, distorted, and the voice, it sounded like Captain Hensley, their commanding officer, who had been killed 2 days earlier. Thomas froze. He tried to reply, his voice shaking. "Captain, is that you?" No response. Only the whisper again, longer this time, softer. "We left us behind." The next morning, the fog was thick, so thick that men could barely see 10 meters ahead. The battalion moved out, heading toward the coast, but as they reached the edge of a small village, they noticed something strange. Buildings hollowed out, hearts being worked on. At first there was a relief, more survivors, reinforcements. But something was wrong. Their uniforms were torn, their helmets dented, their faces pale as chalk, their eyes hollow like glass marbles. They didn't speak. They just walked, silently, in formation, rifles in hand, moving past Thomas's company and vanishing into the fog. Private Reed whispered, "Who were they?" No one answered, because everyone knew those men were from the 8th Battalion who'd been wiped out the week before.
When they finally reached the beach, it was chaos. Tens of thousands of men waiting, praying for rescue, bombs falling from the sky, smoke rising like black towers. Thomas and his men dug into the sand, watching ships appear and vanish through the haze. Then, late that night, he saw something that chilled him to the bone. Far down the shoreline, beyond the fires and wreckage, stood a line of soldiers, perfectly still. They weren't moving. They weren't speaking. Just standing there, staring toward the sea. The moonlight reflected off their helmets, but their faces were dark, almost featureless. A sergeant near Thomas shouted, "Oi, you lot, over here!" No response. Then a single voice carried on the wind, "We never left." And just like that, they vanished. Thomas survived Dunkirk. He was one of the lucky ones, pulled onto a destroyer bound for Dover. But he never spoke about what he saw. Not for years. Until, in 1965, a British historian named Arthur Milburn visited him at a veterans' hospital. Thomas was frail, barely able to hold a cup. But when Milburn mentioned Dunkirk, Thomas's hands began to tremble. He said, "They're still there." Milburn asked, "Who?" Thomas looked out the window, eyes distant, and whispered, "The ones we left behind. They never stopped fighting." Milburn thought he was delirious, until later that night he turned on the old field radio Thomas kept by his bed. Through the static came a faint signal, Morse code, repeating one phrase again and again, "Hold the line." To this day, fishermen off the coast of Dunkirk report strange lights at night, blue and white, like lanterns moving just above the water. Divers have heard the sound of marching boots under the waves. And some tourists swear that on foggy mornings you can see figures standing far down the beach, faces blurred by mist, their rifles at their sides, watching the sea. Maybe it's just a trick of light. Or maybe some battles never end. Maybe the ghosts of Dunkirk still keep their post, guarding the beach where they fell, waiting for orders that will never come. History remembers the living, but sometimes it's the dead who keep the memory alive. This has been the Ghost Soldiers of Dunkirk. And if you ever walk that beach at dawn, and the mist feels colder than it should, listen closely. You might just hear them. Hold the line.